It's no small feat to be the best action movie of all time. Through all the Marvels and Star Wars and studio action franchises like John Wick, Fast and the Furious, Pirates of the Caribbean, Terminator 2 remains the gold standard for action flicks. It really is the perfect action movie. From the mind of James Cameron, Terminator 2 was a film that was long overdue when it was released in the summer of 1991. Fans had been clamoring for a sequel ever since the breakout hit Terminator unleashed itself onto unsuspecting crowds in 1984. Terminator was an exquisitely constructed action thriller that became an instant classic, in part thanks to an iconic performance by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold went on to become a huge star and was the 80s most shining example of its preoccupation with hulking one-man armies. But a sequel had a lot to overcome before it could make it to the screen. The complex visual creation of the liquid metal T-1000 was virtually impossible to realize on screen at the time. It wasn't until Cameron's underwater epic The Abyss, with its proof-of-concept water tentacle, that the possibility of realizing the T-1000 on screen became feasible. There were also intellectual property disputes between Hemdale, who owned 50% of the rights, and Carolco, who was desperate to produce a sequel. Eventually a deal was worked out and things started rolling. The perfection of Terminator 2 has its origins in the first film, where Sarah Connor was being pursued by the unstoppable killing machine and barely survived. The sequel is one of the rare action films that takes trauma seriously, and Sarah's horrific ordeal from the first film becomes a virtual case study in how trauma can completely change a person's mental and physical state from top to bottom. Cameron gave the same dramatic weight to Ellen Ripley in Aliens, another Cameron hero dealing with a crippling traumatic handicap. In the sequel, Connor is barely a personality anymore, seemingly a shell of her former self, gripped in a vice of emotional pain and trauma and cursed with the knowledge of humanity's soon-to-come destruction. As a result, she becomes single-minded in purpose when the threat of the original Terminator presents itself. She becomes cold, calculating, undaunted in her pursuit and ruthless in her actions. If this is sounding suspiciously similar to the Terminator, then you'd be right. The brilliant twist of the sequel is that Sarah becomes the very thing that destroyed her life. She becomes her own kind of Terminator. And this arc culminates in the shocking sequence at the Miles Dyson residence, where she is hell-bent on preventing Dyson from bringing about the end of the world. Realizing what she's become, she breaks down and the film evolves beyond a mere action flick and becomes a touching, poignant example of catharsis. This is just one of the many brilliantly realized strokes that the film has. A lot of people over the years have come to look down on Edward Furlong's performance of John Connor, but I always felt he was a perfect fit for the role. He has the unfortunate position of being a child, and child actors are extremely underdeveloped emotionally, so it is very rare to see brilliant performances by children. But Furlong injects John with just the right balance between anarchist Gen Xer and emotionally vulnerable child. I think people may have been trying to link the older, rugged, battle-hardened John Connor with the 12-year-old troublemaker we see in the film, and they just can't seem to make that link. But every great leader was once a child, and it is very hard to picture the older version when they are that young, just like it is almost impossible to reconcile our own childhoods with the life we lead as mature adults. Maturation, honor, and physical ability is a long, slow process that takes many years. Furlong brings enough to the table to hint at these things, and really, the point is that John isn't yet the man he will grow into, but he does evolve over the course of the film to become more responsible, more mature, and more of a leader, even if some of the annoying qualities of youth remain. That just can't be helped. But Furlong's performance helps the film more than it hurts it. Joe Morton's portrayal of Miles Dyson was an inspiration, not only because it was refreshing to see a black actor in a complex role like this, but because Morton makes so much of so little screen time. Dyson isn't introduced until much later in the film, but even he has an effective character arc, going from being gung-ho about a technological future he's helping to shape, to being horrified when learning the truth and then willing to destroy his life's work. and sacrifice his own life in the process. It's a poignant performance that runs the gamut of emotions. Schwarzenegger once again brings his incredible physical presence to this role. The Terminator films have always managed to distill what's best about Arnold down to its essence: his physical intimidation and imposing physique. While this has iffy results when he plays humans, it works wonders for his Terminator performances.
He's one of the most professional people I've ever worked with. He has incredible concentration. He takes physical direction like no actor I've ever worked with.
And, like Sarah Connor, the Terminator has an inversion of a role this time. While he remains a virtual tank charging his way through scenes, he no longer is the frightening, almost demonic specter that he was in the first film. Now he's the good guy, charged with protecting the people his previous robotic model was programmed to annihilate in the original film. This begins to create an interesting thematic idea of a machine taking on more human traits, and Arnold balances this tightrope perfectly. His glimpses of humanity never seem forced or artificial, just genuine enough to elicit empathy in the audience. This is a lot harder than it seems, and the combination of Cameron's whip-smart writing and direction and Arnold's rock-solid performance create what may be the film's most interesting conceit. Sarah is becoming more machine-like, and the Terminator is becoming more human. This yin and yang is the heart of the film's storyline, but towards the end, both characters come to terms with the incontrovertible facts. Sarah isn't a machine, and the Terminator can never be human. But the point is that these are just concepts, not facts. Humans can grow so cold, distant, and calculated that they lose all humanity, while machines, specifically AI, can begin to display more human-like traits. This is one of the main theories in my 2001 breakdown, where the role reversals of the humans and the AI in the film is what propels the theme forward. It's no coincidence that Cameron is a huge fan of 2001, maybe borrowing this idea and repurposing it for his groundbreaking sequel. Speaking of groundbreaking, it's easy to take for granted now, with CGI being completely ubiquitous in Hollywood storytelling. But back in 1991, the computer-generated visual effects of the liquid metal T-1000 were new and groundbreaking. Crowds had never seen anything like this, and witnessing history in the making on the big screen in '91 for me was something I'll never forget. And Cameron uses this digital tool not just as a gimmick, but in extremely clever ways that propel the action forward. This is an example of CGI being used properly to tell a story, with just enough eye candy to mesmerize audiences. Today's bloated action extravaganzas seem to forget this, favoring eye candy over storytelling. And audiences have become so accustomed to this that they expect it. This in turn causes studios to keep delivering it, and the cycle never seems to break. Robert Patrick brings Cameron's advanced creation to life, and he was as frightening as Arnold was back in the original film. There are moments the T-1000 has to interact with people, and somehow Patrick is able to bring a simultaneously pleasant but creepy quality to these interactions. And he has the formidable task of being perceived as a major threat to Arnold's Terminator. But Patrick pulls this off wonderfully, and their showdowns are fantastic. Stylistically, Terminator 2 has a propulsive visual quality that whisks the audience from one major set piece to another. The film just seems to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes on, with each set piece never feeling forced, but a natural progression of the film's events. And everything feels grounded in reality, giving the sense that these things are actually happening. Later action films seemed to embrace too much of a fantastical tone, so the events never seem like they're happening in a real place. That's one of Cameron's greatest strengths, and an important rule in fiction.
The more fantastic the subject, the more realistic the situation needs to be.
In this way, the fantastical seems even more so, since the audience feels like they're participating in the events. It's not a theme park ride like most other action films embrace. It's a real event, happening to real people in a real space. Terminator 2 is so effective because Cameron wholeheartedly embraces this approach, and everything from the acting to the production design, to the stunts, to the computer-generated visual effects, supports this style. That's why it was so incredibly thrilling to watch when I saw it in '91, and why subsequent action films just never gave me the same kind of visceral thrill. George Lucas embraced this approach for Star Wars, grounding the mind-blowing science fiction elements in a well-worn setting. The sets were dirty, gritty, and felt lived in. The actors were relatable because they weren't pushing a science fiction-y tone. To them, they could have been acting in a gritty street drama. The point is, this method simply works in creating science fiction stories on screen, and the action itself is just mind-blowing. The film totally delivers on this front, and everything from bullet hits to explosions to chases are delivered with such intensity and frightening realism. At the time, Terminator 2 was the most expensive film ever made, at what now seems like a paltry $100 million. But every penny is put on screen and nothing seems to go to waste. It has the look and feel of a big, expensive action film, without ever feeling bloated or overstuffed. I feel that it's James Cameron's crowning achievement as a filmmaker, all his talent rolled into one movie, and before he seemed to spin off into the technological candy store that has become his career of late. Terminator 2 is the action film that all other action films must measure up to. That hasn't changed in the nearly 30 years since its release, and I have my doubts that it ever will. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the like and subscribe button, as I'll be posting more content in the future. Thanks for watching.